Canelo presents To Do or Die, written by James Barrington, writing as Max Adams, performed by Mike Mousicos. Chapter 1, 3rd of September 1939. "Fuck this for a game of soldiers," Eddie Dawson muttered. He relaxed his grip on the sling, lowered the Lee Enfield .303 rifle from his shoulder, closed his eyes briefly and again took stock of his surroundings. To his front, the ground sloped away gently, the uncultivated field an unattractive patchwork of tussocks and wind-blown shrubs and bushes. Behind him lay a wood, in fact little more than a large copse, that echoed with the raucous cries of rooks. It was late afternoon, grey and cold, and his view down the field was blurred by the curtains of steadily falling rain. Dawson was chilled to the bone, soaking wet, really uncomfortable and thoroughly pissed off. He was lying in a shallow ditch that ran in a more or less straight line across the top of the field. His feet and heavy boots were actually submerged in the few inches of brown, stagnant water. The all-pervasive farmyard smell clearly indicated the reason for its colour at the bottom of the trench. Even outside the ditch, the ground was sopping wet, caused by the driving rain that had been lashing the area since first thing the previous morning. And despite the allegedly waterproof ground sheet Dawson was lying on, and the gas cape, a garment of dubious utility made of a thin rubberized material printed with a camouflage pattern and normally intended to be worn like a poncho draped around his shoulders, his army battle dress had managed to absorb the water with considerable efficiency, and he was soaked right through to his army underwear. After almost 4 hours in more or less the same position, he was now lying in what amounted to a cold, sopping wet, heavy and all-enveloping cocoon of brown serge. The only thing he possessed that wasn't wet was the breech of his Lee Enfield, which was fitted with a canvas cover against the pounding rain. "Shut up, Dawson, keep your eyes front." The order came from the man lying directly to his right, who was in every way in precisely the same physical state as Dawson, but who sported corporal's stripes on his arm. Baker was the NCO, non-commissioned officer in charge of the 6-man section. Dawson was the second in command, the 2LC, a lance-corporal. "This is a complete waste of bloody time, Corp, and you know that as well as I do. Just fucking shut up and do what you're told." Corporal Baker's irritation was tempered by the fact that Dawson's opinion fairly closely matched his own, but there was nothing he could do about it. The orders he'd been given were simple and explicit. The 6 members of this section were to guard the field, the obvious approach from the wood, against a possible enemy advance, and the shallow ditch was the best cover they'd been able to find when they arrived there just after midday. The only good thing was that they hadn't actually needed to dig themselves in. The ditch was already deep enough to conceal them. "You said that 3 hours ago," Dawson said, "and I've seen bugger all so far. Even the sodding rabbits have gone home." Dawson's ill temper wasn't surprising. Watching waiting for something to happen is incredibly boring. In this case, compounded by the conditions and the fact that all they'd had to eat since breakfast were the dry compo rations from that morning, they hadn't even been able to light the stove to have a brew up, as it might compromise their position. A supply of hot tea is as essential for morale as bullets are for rifles. So, while it was Eddie Dawson who complained, all 6 men felt pretty much the same. "We've got our orders," Baker snapped. Dawson looked at him. "And they made sense to you, did they? I wouldn't put it past that bastard Mackenzie to send us out here when he knows the action's somewhere else. He's had it in for me ever since he's got here." "He's had it in for you, Dawson, because you're an insubordinate bastard. Now shut up and keep watching." At that moment, the soldier lying on Baker's right-hand side spoke, his voice low and urgent. "Bottom of the field. 200 yards, 10 o'clock by the edge. I saw movement down there." Immediately, every one of the 6 men snapped to high alert as they stared down the slope through the grey curtains of falling rain. "I don't see anything," Baker murmured. "Are you sure?" "Yes. Look, there it is again." And this time they all saw it. A shadowy figure, a rifle clutched in his hands, crept around the edge of the hedge close to the bottom of the grassy hillside, perhaps 200 yards away. The man crouched down in the undergrowth and appeared to scan the field in front of him. Other soldiers, perhaps a half a dozen in all, materialized from the gloom behind him and fanned out across the field, forming a line. "Right, here they come," Baker said somewhat unnecessarily. "Check your weapons, men. Make every shot count, but wait for my order before you fire. Set your sights to 100 yards. Each of the 6 men was armed with a .303 rifle, a No. 4 Mark I Lee Enfield, or SMLE, the standard weapon of the British Army since the turn of the century, and one of the best bolt-action rifles ever made. Each of the soldiers obediently adjusted the flip-up, adjustable aperture micrometer rear sight, as the corporal had ordered. Obviously, Baker wanted there to be no mistakes. At 100 yards, even a very average shot would expect to be able to hit a man-sized target with that rifle, and none of the 6 soldiers lying in the ditch was average. The weeks they spent on the rifle range at Treachery had honed their skills in that department. Below the patrol, the slowly approaching figures separated and formed a line that extended almost all the way across the field. Then they started walking slowly up towards the wood at the top of the hill. But as Dawson picked out a target and watched the line of advancing men, a sudden thought struck him. "Cool," he said urgently, his voice barely above a whisper. "Where are the rest of them? There should be more than that, surely." Baker glanced at him and looked back down the hill at the approaching soldiers. "I count only 5, he said, his voice equally low. "So do I," Dawson replied. "The rest of them could be holding back in reserve, but I don't think so. This looks like a diversion. They're trying to outflank us." Baker considered this for a couple of seconds, then nodded. "You could be right," he conceded and raised his voice slightly so that the other members of the patrol could hear him. "Take Richards and Watson. Get behind us and cover our backs." Dawson nodded and slid backwards, deeper into the shit-filled ditch, then climbed out the other side, crawling through the scrubby bushes that flanked the uphill slope. He checked all around him, scanning the perimeter and looking towards the wood, and to his left and right. Moments later, the other 2 soldiers joined him. "I'll watch the wood," Dawson said, gesturing towards the top of the hill. "You 2 take one side each." They spread out, making use of what little cover they could find, each ducking behind one of the clumps of stunted bushes that dotted the hillside between the ditch and the wood. They'd barely got into position before Dawson spotted 3 men leaving the tree line, probably only 100 yards away, their weapons and battle dress clearly visible. "Cool, they're behind us as well," Dawson called, keeping his voice low but still audible to his companions. "Right," Baker ordered. "Fire at will." Dawson brought his rifle up to the aim, took a deep breath and exhaled part of it, sighted carefully, and pulled the trigger. The flat bang of the .303 cartridge firing, a sudden assault on the silence of the afternoon, seemed to act as a trigger for everyone else in the patrol. Almost immediately, Dawson was deafened by a volley from directly behind him, as the 3 remaining soldiers covering the field opened up on the line of advancing men, and then both Richards and Watson fired as well. The thunderous noise of heavy caliber rapid fire blotted out all other sounds, and the air filled with the unmistakable stench of burnt coldite. Dawson had been right. The enemy was trying to outflank them, and in fact they'd succeeded, approaching the patrol's position from 4 sides simultaneously. He pulled back the bolt on his Lee Enfield, hearing the metallic snicking sound of the well-oiled mechanism. The brass cartridge case span crazily out of the breech over to his right, and he immediately slid the bolt forward to chamber another round. All 3 of the approaching figures, including the man he'd shot at, were still standing. He aimed carefully and fired again, and then again and again. But still the enemy came on, the shots having no effect. Now they returned fire, the crack of their rifles joining the cacophony of noise as the patrol urgently fired shot after shot at their targets. Then there was a new sound, much louder bangs as explosives detonated all around them, adding to the noise and confusion. Dawson fired the last of his 10 rounds and pulled back the bolt to eject the spent cartridge case. Reaching into the ammunition pocket on his webbing, he pulled out a charger clip and pressed the 5 shells down into the magazine. A single glance showed him that there was no time to use another charger to fully reload the weapon. Dropping the charger and slamming the bolt forward, Dawson chambered a cartridge, looked
Sample complete. Ready to continue?